The moment I walked out my front door on that humid Tuesday morning in Charleston, South Carolina, and saw that silver Lexus SUV blocking my easement again, I knew my peaceful suburban life was about to become a war zone. My name is Thomas Yates, and I had just moved into this beautiful colonial-style home 3 months prior. The property came with a documented private easement that ran along the side of my house, providing access to my detached garage and workshop in the back. It was clearly marked on my deed, my survey, and even had a small sign posted that read, "Private easement, no parking." But apparently, reading signs was not a skill possessed by Brenda Carmichael, the HOA president who lived 2 houses down. This was the 4th morning in a row I had discovered her vehicle parked directly in the middle of my easement, making it impossible for me to get my truck out of the garage. I had tried being polite. I had knocked on her door the first time, explained the situation, and she had looked at me with this condescending smile that made my blood pressure spike. "Oh, I am sorry," she had said, not sounding sorry at all. "But you see, we are having work done on our driveway, and I just need somewhere to park temporarily. Surely you can understand that. We are all neighbors here." I had pointed out that my easement was private property and that blocking it prevented me from accessing my own garage. She had waved her hand dismissively and said she would move it in a little bit. That little bit turned into 6 hours, and I had been late to an important client meeting. The second day, I left a polite note on her windshield explaining again that this was a private easement and asking her to please park elsewhere. The note was still there when I came home that evening, and her car had not moved until well after dinner time. The third day, I called her directly. She answered with an exasperated sigh and told me I was making a mountain out of a molehill, and that the HOA was considering designating my easement as overflow parking anyway since it was underutilized space. I had explained with diminishing patience that the HOA had no authority over my private easement, which was explicitly excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction in my property deed. She had laughed, actually laughed, and said, "We will see about that." Now, on this 4th morning, staring at her Lexus blocking my path yet again, I pulled out my phone and called Anderson's Towing, a local company I had already researched extensively after day 3. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. "Anderson's Towing, how can we help you?" "Hi, I need a vehicle towed from my private property. It is blocking my easement and preventing me from accessing my garage." "Is this your property, sir?" "Yes, I own the property, and I have clear documentation that this is a private easement. The vehicle has been warned multiple times." "We can have someone there within 30 minutes. What is the address?" I gave him the details, confirmed the fee structure, and hung up. Then I did something I knew would be important later. I took photographs from multiple angles showing the vehicle clearly blocking the easement, the posted signs, and the timestamp on my phone. I also recorded a brief video walking the length of the easement, narrating the situation. 28 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck rumbled down our quiet street. The driver, a stocky guy named Mike with a weathered face and kind eyes, stepped out and surveyed the situation. "That the one?" he asked, pointing at the Lexus. "That is the one." He walked around it, took his own photos, and nodded. "You got documentation that this is your property?" I showed him the relevant pages from my deed that I had started keeping on my phone, along with the survey map. He studied them, nodded again, and got to work. The sound of the hydraulic lift was music to my ears. I was inside making coffee when I heard the screaming. Brenda Carmichael came running down the sidewalk in her tennis outfit, her blonde bob bouncing with each step, her face already red with fury. What do you think you are doing? Stop right now, stop. Mike, to his credit, did not stop. He continued securing the vehicle to his flatbed with practiced efficiency. That is my car, Brenda shrieked. You cannot just tow my car. I walked out onto my porch, coffee mug in hand. Actually, he can. You are parked on my private easement, blocking my access. I have asked you repeatedly to stop. She whirled on me, pointing a finger like a weapon. How dare you? Do you have any idea who I am? I am the HOA president. I will make your life a living hell for this. You are the HOA president, I said calmly. You are not the owner of my private easement. That would be me. This is harassment. This is assault. I am calling the police. Please do, I said. I would love for them to explain property rights to you. Mike finished loading the Lexus and handed me a receipt. She can pick it up at our lot on Rivers Avenue. She will need to pay the towing fee plus storage. How much? Brenda demanded. $250 for the tow plus $25 per day storage after the first 24 hours. Her face went from red to purple. This is theft. This is extortion, Mike shrugged. Madam, this is private property. The owner has the right to remove unauthorized vehicles. You can file a complaint if you like, but you will need to pay the fees to retrieve your vehicle. He climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving Brenda standing in the middle of the street, shaking with rage. You will regret this, Thomas, she hissed. I will make sure of it. I took a sip of my coffee. Please do not park in my easement again. She stormed off, and I went back inside, feeling both satisfied and uneasy. I knew this was not over. I was right. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Violation notice, immediate action required." I opened it, already knowing it would be ridiculous. Dear Mr. Yates, it has come to our attention that you have violated HOA bylaws section 7.3.2 regarding the unauthorized installation of signage on your property. The sign reading private easement, no parking was not submitted for architectural review and approval prior to installation. You have 48 hours to remove this sign or face daily fines of $100. Additionally, we are conducting a full review of your property for other potential violations. Sincerely, the HOA Board. I read it 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little more. The sign had been there when I bought the house. It was a small, tasteful marker on a metal stake. And Section 7.3.2, which I looked up in my copy of the bylaws, actually exempted informational signage related to property boundaries and access from the approval requirement. I forwarded the email to my real estate attorney, Janet Morris, with a brief explanation. She called me back within an hour. Thomas, this is harassment, pure and simple. That section does not apply to your sign and they know it. So what do I do? You respond in writing, cite the actual text of Section 7.3.2, and inform them that any fines levied will be challenged. Also, keep documentation of everything. Every email, every interaction, every photograph. If this escalates, we will need it. It is going to escalate, I said. I can feel it. Probably, she agreed. But you are in the right here. Your easement is explicitly excluded from HOA jurisdiction. It is in your deed, it was in the seller's deed, and it has been documented since the property was first subdivided in 1998. They do not have a leg to stand on. I thanked her and hung up, then spent an hour crafting a carefully worded response to the HOA, citing the relevant sections and politely declining to remove the sign. I sent it off and tried to focus on my work. I ran a consulting business from home, which was one of the reasons the garage and workshop access was so important. I had equipment and materials stored there that I needed to access regularly. That afternoon, Brenda's Lexus appeared in my easement again. I stared at it through my office window, genuinely amazed. She had paid $250 to get her car back less than 24 hours ago, and here she was, parked in the exact same spot, like nothing had happened. I called Anderson's Towing again. Anderson's Towing, Mike speaking. Mike, it is Thomas Yates. Same situation as yesterday, he chuckled. She is back already, she is back already. Some people got to learn the hard way. I will be there in 20. This time I watched from my window. Mike arrived, took his photos, and began loading the Lexus. Brenda must have been watching too, because she came flying out of her house before he even had it fully secured. The argument was louder this time. She threatened lawsuits. She threatened to have his business license revoked. She called me every name she could think of, without quite crossing into legally actionable territory. Mike remained calm and professional throughout, and the Lexus left on his flatbed for the second time in 2 days. I received another email from the HOA that evening. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 for creating a hostile environment and harassing fellow residents. It cited no specific bylaw, no evidence, and no procedure for appeal. I forwarded it to Janet. She replied with a single sentence, "Do not pay anything." I am drafting a cease and desist letter. The next morning, Brenda's Lexus was not in my easement. Instead, there was a bright orange traffic cone and a handwritten sign that read HOA overflow parking authorized vehicles only. I walked out, picked up the cone, and threw it into my recycling bin. I pulled up the sign, which had been stuck into the ground with a wooden stake, and tossed it in as well. Then I took photographs of everything and emailed them to Janet with a note. Escalating. She called me immediately. I am filing for a restraining order and sending the cease and desist today. This is beyond normal HOA overreach. This is targeted harassment. She is not going to stop, I said. No, Janet agreed, but we are going to make it very expensive for her to continue. I spent the rest of the day working, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had moved to this neighborhood because it seemed quiet and peaceful. The house was perfect, the price was right, and I had specifically verified that my easement was private before closing. I never imagined I would end up in a war with the HOA president over something so straightforward. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a Charleston police officer standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. "Thomas Yates?" he asked. "That is me. I am Officer Davidson. I received a call about a possible property dispute. A Mrs. Brenda Carmichael said you have been stealing her parking signs and harassing her." I took a deep breath and invited him in. I showed him my property deed, my survey, my photographs, my email chain with the HOA, and the documentation from both towing incidents. I showed him where Brenda had placed the cone and sign in my private easement that morning. Officer Davidson looked through everything carefully, then nodded slowly. "Sir, this is clearly your property and you have the right to keep it clear. Mrs. Carmichael does not have the right to designate parking on your easement. Can you tell her that?" "I can, but this is really a civil matter. If she continues to harass you, you can file for a restraining order." "My attorney is already working on that," he nodded approvingly. "Good. That is the right move. I will go have a conversation with Mrs. Carmichael and explain the situation. But my advice, document everything. People like this do not usually stop until they are forced to." After he left, I felt slightly better but still tense. Officer Davidson was right. Brenda was not going to stop willingly. The next morning, her Lexus was back in my easement. I called Anderson's Towing before I even had my coffee. "Mike, it is Thomas Yates. Let me guess. 3rd time. She really does not learn, does she? I will be there in 15. This time the tow happened without incident. Brenda either did not notice or had given up trying to stop it. But that afternoon, I came home from a meeting to find a notice taped to my front door. Emergency, HOA meeting mandatory attendance required. Thursday, 7 p.m. Topic: Bylaw violations and community standards. Failure to attend will result in immediate fines. It was Tuesday. The meeting was 2 days away. I photographed the notice and sent it to Janet. She responded, "Do not go. They are trying to create a hostile environment where they can claim you were non-compliant or combative. I will attend on your behalf as your legal representative." Thursday evening, while Janet was at the HOA meeting, I stayed home and tried to work. She called me at 8:30. "Thomas, you need to hear this. I recorded the meeting with their permission." "How bad was it?" "Brenda spent 45 minutes presenting a case that you are a danger to the community. She had photographs, printed emails, and even testimony from 3 other board members about your aggressive behavior." "I have not done anything aggressive, I know, but she is building a narrative. She claimed you threatened her during the towing incidents, that you have been vandalizing HOA property, and that you are refusing to comply with legitimate violations. I presented your documentation, explained the easement situation, and cited the relevant laws." 2 of the board members looked very uncomfortable by the end of it. "What happened?" I informed them that any further harassment would result in a lawsuit against both Brenda personally and the HOA as an entity. I also mentioned that you are prepared to file complaints with the state HOA regulatory board and that you have documented everything. One of the board members, a man named Richard, asked for a private meeting with me afterward. And he told me, off the record, that Brenda has been increasingly erratic over the past year. She is obsessed with control and has driven 3 families out of the neighborhood with similar harassment campaigns. He and another board member are considering removing her as president, but they need more documentation of her behavior. So I am not the first person she has done this to, not even close, but you might be the first one who has fought back hard enough to create consequences. I sat down, processing this information. So what happens now? Now we wait and document, and if she parks in your easement again, you tow her again, every single time. This is insane. Yes, Janet agreed, but it is important. If Brenda is not stopped, she will keep doing this to other people. Saturday morning, Brenda's Lexus was back in my easement. I called Mike at Anderson's Towing. By this point, we were on a first-name basis. "4th time?" he asked. "4th time." "Thomas, I got to say, this is the most stubborn person I have ever seen. Most folks learn after the 2nd tow. She is not most folks, clearly. I will be there in 10. The tow went smoothly. I watched from my window as Mike loaded the Lexus and drove away. I wondered how much Brenda had paid in towing fees at this point. 4 tows at $250 each, plus storage fees. She had to be over $1,000 in the hole. That afternoon, I got my answer. A certified letter arrived from a law firm in downtown Charleston. Brenda was suing me for harassment, emotional distress, and theft of services. She claimed I had damaged her vehicle during the towing, prevented her from accessing her home, and created a hostile environment. She was seeking $25,000 in damages. I immediately scanned the letter and sent it to Janet, then called her. "I got it," she said before I could speak. "This is laughable. She does not have a case. We have clear documentation that she was parked on your private property, that you warned her repeatedly, and that you followed proper procedures for each tow. So what do? I will respond on your behalf. And Thomas, this is good news actually. How is being sued good news? Because now everything is on the record in court. All of your documentation, all of her harassment, all of it. And we can countersue for harassment and abusive process. This might actually end things faster. I hope you are right. Trust me, I have been doing this for 15 years. Brenda just made a huge mistake. The following Monday, I had to appear at a client site across town. I left early in the morning and did not get back until almost 6 in the evening. When I pulled onto my street, I saw something that made me hit the brakes so hard my truck lurched. Brenda's Lexus was in my easement, but it was not alone. There were 2 other cars parked there as well, a Honda Accord and a Toyota Camry, both blocking the entire length of my easement from the street to my garage. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I pulled out my phone and called Anderson's Towing. Mike Thomas Yates, I need 3 cars towed. Three, she has escalated. I will need to make 2 trips. Let me bring the first truck now, then I will come back with our second driver. Whatever it takes. I parked my truck on the street and walked to the 3 vehicles, photographing each one, their positions, their license plates, everything. Then I noticed something on my front door. Another notice from the HOA. Final warning, your continued harassment of HOA President Brenda Carmichael has resulted in a vote by the board. You are hereby fined $10,000 and face immediate legal action if payment is not received within 30 days. Additionally, your property has been flagged for forced sale under HOA Bylaws Section 12.4.6 if you continue to violate community standards. I read it twice, feeling a cold rage settle over me. Section 12.4.6 was about properties that posed safety hazards or severe violations. It had nothing to do with my situation. This was not just harassment anymore. Brenda was trying to force me out of my home. I called Janet. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation, then forwarded her photos of the notice and the 3 cars blocking my easement. Mike arrived 20 minutes later with his flatbed. He took one look at the 3 cars and whistled. She really went all in, apparently. Whose cars are the other 2? No idea, but they are on my private property and they are getting towed. We started with the Lexus. As Mike was loading it, a woman I did not recognize came running out of Brenda's house. She was younger, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Wait, that is my car, she pointed at the Honda. Mrs. Carmichael said I could park there. She said it was HOA overflow parking. I turned to her. Madam, this is my private easement. It is not HOA parking. Mrs. Carmichael lied to you. But I did not know. Please do not tow my car. Did you see the signs posted? I saw them, but Mrs. Carmichael said they were old and not valid anymore. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was a victim of Brenda's manipulations just like I was. Listen, if you move your car right now, I will not have it towed. But you need to understand that this is private property, not HOA parking. She looked like she might cry. Thank you so much. I just moved in last month and I do not want any trouble. She hurried to her Honda and backed it out quickly, giving me an apologetic wave as she drove away. The Toyota was another matter. No one came to claim it, even after Mike loaded and removed the Lexus. He came back an hour later with a second truck, and we towed the Toyota as well. As the second tow truck pulled away, Brenda appeared on her front lawn. She was not yelling this time. Instead, she stood there with her arms crossed, staring at me with pure hatred. This is not over, she called across the yards. It will be when you stop parking in my easement, I replied. She went back inside without another word, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about her silence was more disturbing than her previous tantrums. Janet called me back at 8 that night. Thomas, I saw your messages. We need to meet tomorrow. This has crossed a line. The $10,000 fine is completely fabricated and the threat of forced sale is illegal. They cannot force you to sell your property for not paying illegitimate fines. So, what is our next move? We file an emergency injunction against the HOA and Brenda personally. We seek a restraining order prohibiting her from entering your easement or contacting you directly. And we countersue for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. I am also going to contact the state HOA regulatory board and file a formal complaint. How long will all this take? The injunction hearing should be within a week. The rest could take months, but the injunction will stop her in the meantime. We met the next day at her office, and I spent 2 hours going through every piece of documentation I had. Janet's paralegal helped organize it all into a comprehensive timeline. By the time we were done, we had a file 3 inches thick. This is one of the most clear-cut cases I have ever seen, Janet said. Brenda has provided us with a perfect paper trail of harassment. Why would she be so stupid about it? Because she is used to people backing down. She has probably been doing this for years with no real consequences. You are the first person who has stood up to her with proper documentation and legal representation. The injunction hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. In the meantime, I was told to continue documenting everything and to call the police if Brenda or anyone else parked in my easement. For 3 days, my easement stayed clear. I started to hope that maybe the lawsuit had scared Brenda into backing off. I should have known better. Thursday night, I was woken up at 2 in the morning by the sound of my garbage cans being knocked over. I got up, looked out my window, and saw a figure in dark clothing dumping trash all over my driveway and easement. I could not see their face, but the body shape looked like Brenda. I grabbed my phone and started recording from my window. The figure scattered trash everywhere, then spray-painted something on my driveway before running off. I called the police immediately. Officer Davidson arrived within 15 minutes, along with another officer. They took my statement and looked at the video I had recorded. "Can you identify who that is?" Officer Davidson asked. "It looks like Brenda Carmichael, but I cannot say for certain. The video is dark and they are wearing a hood. But you believe it was her?" "Based on height, build, and the fact that she has been harassing me for weeks, yes." They photographed the spray paint, which read "Move Out" in large red letters across my driveway. They collected some of the trash as evidence. Officer Davidson looked at me seriously. "Mr. Yates, this is vandalism and potentially criminal trespassing. If we can confirm it was Mrs. Carmichael, she could face charges." "I have a doorbell camera being installed tomorrow," I said. "I should have done it weeks ago." "That is a good idea. In the meantime, I am going to have a conversation with Mrs. Carmichael first thing in the morning." They left around 3:30, and I spent the rest of the night cleaning up trash and trying to scrub spray paint off my driveway. I sent all the photos and the video to Janet at 6 in the morning. She called me at 7. "Thomas, this is criminal behavior. We are adding this to our injunction filing. I am also going to push for the police to investigate thoroughly. If we can prove it was Brenda, she will face criminal charges on top of everything else." The doorbell camera installation company arrived at 9, and by noon I had a high-definition camera covering my entire front yard, driveway, and easement, with cloud backup and night vision. It should have been my first purchase. Friday morning, the day of our injunction hearing, I woke up to find Brenda's Lexus parked in my easement again. But this time, I had it all on video. The doorbell camera had recorded her pulling in at 5 in the morning, parking and walking back to her house. I downloaded the video, sent it to Janet, and called Anderson's Towing for what I hoped would be the last time. Mike Thomas Yates. One more time, but I have it on video now. Good. That will help your case. I will be there in 15. Mike towed the Lexus while I prepared for court. Janet picked me up at noon, and we drove to the courthouse together. The hearing was in a small courtroom with just a judge, no jury. Brenda was there with her attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept shuffling papers. Janet presented our case methodically, starting with my property deed and survey, moving through each instance of Brenda parking in my easement, showing the documentation of all 5 tows, presenting the HOA's harassing emails and fabricated fines, and finishing with the video of the vandalism and this morning's parking violation. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, listened to everything without interruption. Then she turned to Brenda's attorney. "Counselor, do you have any evidence that your client has a right to park in Mr. Yates' private easement?" The attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client believed in good faith that the easement was part of HOA common property and available for overflow parking. Did she continue to park there after being informed it was private property? There was a dispute about the interpretation of the property boundaries." "I am not asking about a dispute. I am asking a simple question. After Mr. Yates informed Mrs. Carmichael that the easement was his private property, did she continue to park there?" The attorney hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "And did she instruct others to park there as well?" My client was trying to address a legitimate parking shortage in the community. On someone else's private property, without their permission, after being explicitly told not to. Judge Morrison looked at the file in front of her. "I am also seeing allegations of vandalism, harassment, and abuse of HOA authority. Mr. Yates has provided video evidence of Mrs. Carmichael parking on his easement this very morning. How do you explain that? My client maintains that she has a right to. She does not." Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. "I have reviewed the property deed and survey. The easement is clearly private property. There is no ambiguity here." She turned to Janet. "What are you seeking?" Janet stood. "Your Honor, we are seeking an immediate injunction prohibiting Mrs. Carmichael from entering my client's easement or contacting him directly. We are also seeking an order for the HOA to cease all harassment and to rescind all fabricated fines. Finally, we are seeking compensatory damages for the harassment, vandalism, and legal fees. Granted on all counts. Mrs. Carmichael, you are hereby ordered to stay off Mr. Yates' property, including his easement. You are prohibited from parking there, walking there, or placing any items there. You are also prohibited from contacting Mr. Yates directly. Any communication must go through your attorney." "Do you understand?" Brenda stood, her face red. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. He has been harassing me. He has had my car towed 5 times. Because you were parked on his private property after being repeatedly told not to. That is not harassment, Mrs. Carmichael. That is exercising property rights. You are lucky he is not pressing charges for the vandalism, though I note the police investigation is ongoing." "I did not vandalize anything." Judge Morrison looked at her coldly. "We have video evidence suggesting otherwise. I recommend you speak with your attorney about that matter. In the meantime, this injunction is effective immediately. If you violate it, you will be held in contempt of court, which carries penalties including fines and jail time. Am I clear?" Brenda sat down, trembling with rage. The judge turned to the HOA's representative, an older man named Harold who had been sitting quietly in the back. "Are you on the HOA board?" "Yes, Your Honor. I am the treasurer." "Then you can relay this message. All fines against Mr. Yates are rescinded. All harassment is to cease immediately. If I see this HOA in my courtroom again for similar behavior, I will be looking very carefully at your practices and potentially recommending state investigation. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, we will comply fully. Good. This hearing is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Janet put a hand on my shoulder. You did it. She cannot touch you now. What about the criminal investigation? Officer Davidson told me they are comparing the figure in your video to Brenda's height and build. They are also checking to see if any of the trash can be traced back to her. If they can build a solid case, she will be charged. I just want this to be over. It will be. The injunction is ironclad. If she violates it, she goes to jail. We got lunch at a small cafe downtown, and Janet walked me through what would happen next. The HOA had 30 days to formally rescind the fines and provide written confirmation. Brenda had to stay away from my property permanently. If either party violated the order, I could file a contempt motion immediately. What about the countersuit? I asked. We will pursue it. Between the harassment, the vandalism, the emotional distress, and your legal fees, we have a strong case. I would expect a settlement offer within a few months. I do not want her money. I just want to be left alone. The money sends a message. It makes sure she thinks twice before doing this to someone else. I drove home that afternoon feeling cautiously optimistic. When I pulled onto my street, my easement was clear. No cars, no cones, no signs. Just my private property, exactly as it should be. I spent the weekend installing motion sensor lights around my property and upgrading my security system. If Brenda tried anything else, I would have it documented from every angle. Monday morning, I woke up to an email from Harold, the HOA treasurer. Dear Mr. Yates, on behalf of the HOA board, I want to apologize for the harassment you have experienced. All fines against your property have been rescinded. We are conducting an internal review of HOA procedures and leadership. Please let me know if you have any concerns going forward. Sincerely, Harold Peterson. I forwarded it to Janet with a note. Is this real? She called me. It is real. I think they are preparing to remove Brenda from the board. That conversation I had with Richard is bearing fruit. Good. She should not have that kind of power over people. 2 days later, Officer Davidson called me. Mr. Yates, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We compared the video footage to Mrs. Carmichael's height and build, and it is consistent. We also found receipts in her trash that match some of the garbage dumped on your property. We are moving forward with charges for vandalism and criminal trespassing. What happens now? She will be arrested, arraigned, and given a court date. This is a misdemeanor, so she will likely make bail, but she will have a criminal record. And combined with your injunction, she will be facing serious consequences if she comes near your property again. Thank you, officer. I appreciate all your help. Just doing my job. People like Mrs. Carmichael need to understand that HOA authority has limits. You cannot abuse your position to harass your neighbors. 3 days later, I was working in my home office when I saw a police car pull up to Brenda's house. Officer Davidson and another officer went to her door. There was a brief conversation, and then Brenda was led out in handcuffs. Her husband, a quiet man I had only seen a handful of times, watched from the doorway with a resigned expression. I felt no satisfaction watching it happen. Just relief that maybe, finally, this nightmare was ending. That evening I got a call from Richard, one of the HOA board members Janet had mentioned. Mr. Yates, this is Richard Foster. I want to apologize for everything you have been through. The board met in emergency session today, and we have voted unanimously to remove Brenda Carmichael as HOA president. We are also implementing new oversight procedures to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. I appreciate that, Richard. We are also going to make sure your easement is clearly marked on all HOA maps and documentation, so there is never any confusion about it being private property. That would be helpful. Again, I am truly sorry. Brenda had us all convinced you were the problem. It was not until your attorney presented all that documentation that we realized how badly she had been lying to us. After we hung up, I sat on my back porch and looked at my garage, accessible once again without any obstacles. It had been a month-long battle over something that should have been simple. My private property should have been respected from day one. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet. My easement stayed clear. I did not receive any harassing emails. The HOA sent me a formal letter rescinding all fines and providing updated maps showing my easement clearly marked as private property excluded from HOA jurisdiction. Brenda pleaded no contest to the vandalism and trespassing charges. She was sentenced to 100 hours of community service, a $1,000 fine, and a year of probation. The injunction remained in place permanently. 6 weeks after the court hearing, I received a settlement offer from Brenda's attorney. She was offering $15,000 to settle all civil claims. Janet advised me to take it. It is a good offer, and it closes this chapter. You can use the money to cover your legal fees, and the rest is compensation for what you went through. I agreed, and we settled. The money arrived 2 weeks later. For months afterward, I would tense up every time I looked out my window, expecting to see that silver Lexus blocking my easement. But it never appeared. Brenda and her husband moved out of the neighborhood 3 months after the settlement. I heard from Harold that she and her husband were divorcing, and she was moving to Columbia to live with her sister. The new HOA president, Richard, ran the organization completely differently. He actually read the bylaws, he respected property rights, and he treated residents like adults. The neighborhood became the peaceful place I had hoped it would be when I moved in. A year after the whole ordeal started, I was in my driveway washing my truck when my new neighbor, a young couple with a baby, came over to introduce themselves. They had just moved into Brenda's old house. "We heard there was some drama with the previous owner," the husband said. "Something about parking," I smiled. "That is one way to put it, but it all worked out in the end. Good to hear. We are hoping for a quiet place to raise our daughter." "It is quiet now," I said. "Very quiet." They went back to their unpacking, and I finished washing my truck. Then I pulled it around back, driving easily through my clear, unobstructed easement to my garage. Sometimes I still think about those weeks of battle with Brenda. How something so simple, so clear-cut, had turned into such a nightmare because one person refused to respect boundaries. How much time, money, and stress could have been avoided if she had just accepted that she was wrong and parked somewhere else. But I also think about the lessons I learned. Document everything. Know your rights. Do not be afraid to enforce your boundaries. And most importantly, do not back down when someone tries to bully you, even if they have a position of authority. My easement is still clearly marked with its private easement no parking sign. My doorbell camera still records everything that happens in my driveway. And my property deed, survey, and all the court documents are filed carefully in my home office, just in case. But I have not needed them. My easement stays clear. My property rights are respected. And my life is peaceful again, exactly as it should be. On a warm Saturday afternoon in October, almost 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was having a barbecue in my backyard. Some friends from work had come over, along with a few neighbors including Harold and his wife. We were laughing and grilling burgers when Harold raised his beer. "A toast," he said, "to Thomas, the man who stood up to the tyrant and won." Everyone laughed and clinked their drinks together. I smiled, feeling genuinely happy. Not because I had won some battle, but because I was home on my property, surrounded by good people who respected each other. To property rights, I said, and to learning when to call a tow truck. Everyone laughed again, and we went back to our barbecue. My truck was parked in the garage, accessible through my clear easement. My home was mine, fully and completely. And the HOA was just a background organization that handled landscaping and pool maintenance as it should be. Sometimes the simplest rights require the biggest fights to defend. But they are always worth defending. My easement was never about parking. It was about respect, boundaries, and refusing to let anyone take what was rightfully mine. Brenda Carmichael learned that lesson the hard way, 5 tows and 1 criminal conviction later. I hope she learned it well enough that she never tries it again with anyone else. But if she does, I hope her next target has the documentation, the determination, and the stubbornness to fight back just as hard. Because that is what it takes sometimes. Not anger, not revenge, but simple, stubborn insistence on what is right. Document everything. Know your rights. Call the tow truck. Every single time. The barbecue continued into the evening, and as the sun set over Charleston, I looked at my house, my property, my easement, and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not because the war was won, but because it never should have been a war in the first place. And now everyone knew it. My easement was mine. My home was mine. And no HOA president, no matter how determined, could take that away. The story of Brenda and the parking war became something of a legend in our neighborhood. New residents would hear about it during HOA meetings, usually as a cautionary tale about respecting property boundaries. Richard would reference it when explaining why the HOA had implemented new oversight procedures and why board members now had to attend annual training on property law. I became known as the guy who stood up to the HOA, which was both flattering and slightly embarrassing. I had not set out to be anyone's hero. I had just wanted to park in my own garage, but I understood why the story resonated with people. HOAs were supposed to maintain property values and handle common areas. They were not supposed to harass residents or make up fake rules. Brenda had crossed so many lines that by the end, she was not just violating my property rights, but abusing every resident's trust. The changes Richard implemented made a real difference. Board meetings became transparent, with minutes posted online. Fines could only be levied after a formal hearing with the right to appeal. Property disputes had to be reviewed by an attorney before any action was taken. The HOA even hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the opportunity for any one person to wield too much power. In March, about 2 years after everything started, I received an unexpected call from a reporter at the Charleston Post and Courier. She was writing a story about HOA overreach and had heard about my case. "Would you be willing to be interviewed?" she asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave it all in the past. But another part of me thought about other people dealing with similar situations, feeling helpless against HOA boards that abuse their authority. "Yes," I said, "I will do the interview." The story ran 2 weeks later under the headline, "When HOAs Go Too Far, Charleston Homeowners Battle Highlights Need for Reform." It detailed my case along with several others from around the state. My story was the most extreme, but there were others. HOAs fining people for having the wrong shade of white on their shutters, demanding access to interior homes for inspections, and threatening foreclosure over minor bylaw disputes. The story got picked up by several state news outlets, and within a month, there was movement in the state legislature to reform HOA laws. Proposals included requiring HOAs to carry liability insurance, mandatory mediation before fines could be levied, and criminal penalties for board members who knowingly abused their authority. I testified before a state Senate committee in April. I told them my story, showed them the documentation, and explained how one person's abuse of power had turned my life upside down for months. HOAs serve an important purpose, I said, but they need oversight, they need accountability. And residents need real recourse when boards overstep their authority. What happened to me should never happen to anyone. The bill passed in June, and the governor signed it into law in July. South Carolina became one of the first states in the country with comprehensive HOA reform legislation. It was not perfect, but it was a start. By then, life had fully returned to normal for me. My business was thriving. My home was peaceful. My easement was clear every single day. I had even started dating someone I met at a professional conference, and she thought the whole parking war story was hilarious. "You really had someone's car towed 5 times?" she asked over dinner one night. "I really did. Same person, same car, 5 different times. And she kept parking there, she kept parking there. That is insane." That is what I kept thinking. On the 3rd anniversary of moving into my house, I threw a party. It was partly a housewarming, even though I had lived there for 3 years, and partly a celebration that I could finally enjoy my home without looking over my shoulder. Harold came with his wife. Richard came with his family. Several neighbors came. Even Officer Davidson stopped by for a beer. We stood in my driveway, right on the easement that had caused so much trouble, and talked about how much had changed. "You know what the best part is?" Harold said. "We have had 3 new families move into the neighborhood in the past 6 months, and every single one of them specifically mentioned that they heard we have a good HOA now. Your fight actually increased property values." I laughed. "All I wanted was to park in my garage. And you got that. Plus you changed state law, not bad for a parking dispute." As the party wound down and the last guests left, I stood in my driveway under the stars and looked at my house. It was mine. Fully, completely, undeniably mine. The easement was mine. The property was mine. And no one could tell me otherwise. I thought about Brenda sometimes, wondering if she had learned anything from the experience. I hoped she had. I hoped she was living a quieter life somewhere else, respecting boundaries and understanding that authority comes with responsibility. But mostly I did not think about her at all. She was a chapter in my life that had closed. The story was over. The battle was won, not through anger or revenge, but through documentation, persistence, and an unwillingness to be bullied. My easement never had another car parked in it without my permission. My relationship with the HOA was professional and cordial. My property rights were respected by everyone, and every time I pulled my truck through that easement into my garage, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. Not because I had beaten someone in a fight, but because I was exercising the simple right to use my own property. That is all I had ever wanted. That is all anyone should have to want. Your property is yours. Your boundaries should be respected. And when someone violates that, you have every right to defend it. 5 toes, 1 injunction, 1 criminal conviction, multiple HOA reforms, and 1 clear easement. That was the story of how I defended my property rights against an HOA president who thought she was above the law. It was exhausting, expensive, and stressful, but it was worth it, because in the end my property was mine, and that was all that mattered. Years later, I still live in that house in Charleston. The easement is still clearly marked. The HOA still functions smoothly under good leadership. And new residents still hear the story of the parking war and shake their heads in disbelief. I have become something of an informal advisor for people dealing with HOA disputes. I have helped 3 different neighbors document issues and understand their rights. 2 of them were able to resolve their problems quickly because they knew what to do. One had to go to court, but the precedent from my case made it much easier. The state HOA reform law has helped hundreds of homeowners. I still get emails occasionally from people thanking me for speaking up. It is strange to think that my stubborn refusal to let someone park in my driveway led to real legislative change. But that is how change happens sometimes. One person decides they have had enough. One person decides to document everything and fight back properly. One person stands up and says, "No, this is not right and I am not going to accept it." My easement is just a strip of pavement alongside my house. It is not dramatic or important in the grand scheme of things, but it is mine, and that made it worth fighting for every single time.